Got it.
Good morning, everyone. This is the 1st of December, and this is again is a continuation of the American Council of Independent Laboratories webinars on various standardization activity, primarily in the electromagnetic compatibility arena. This is the last webinar of the year. We've had 5 this year, and they will be posted on the ACIL website within a couple of weeks for future viewing by others as the need arises for whatever time they want to log on. So what I'm showing you today is, by the way, the IEC website, the homepage, and I try to do that at the start of everyone. And if you go down, as I'm scrolling right now, you see on the left the technology sectors, and then if you go down, there's EMC, electromagnetic compatibility, and when you hit that, click on that button, voila, up comes the electromagnetic compatibility homepage in the IEC. And there are on the left-hand side quite a bit of material, which I'm not going to click on because I want to get to the meeting in general that I want to talk about today. But just to give you an idea, if you click on EMC Explained, it gives you when I say a civilian view of what EMC is, that presumably you can talk to your nephew or your mother about what you do if you are in the EMC business. It's pretty well written, and of course the comment there, EMC concerns us all, and for obvious reasons the IEC is wanting to make sure that EMC takes its strong position. And on the left-hand side, there's various other material. We even have the EMC Zone News, which is a listing of the upcoming major EMC symposia and where they are and how to get a hold of the organizers. We have one on Smart Grid, which I contributed to. And if I just click on Smart Grid, up will come what CISPR has put together as the essential standards that could be used for Smart Grid EMC application. So there's a wealth of material there, and I think I'll pause and start going back into the presentation. But I thought it was worthwhile at least to show you where there's quick access to EMC general information and even some more specifics like what I'm showing right now. So let me close this down, and now we'll go into the agenda and we shall start the webinar. Today I'm going to review the material, or at least some of the material that was in at the meeting of the Advisory Committee on EMC, as it shows up there, ACEC, which is a advisory committee to the Standardization Management Board of the IEC, International Electrotechnical Commission. And the IEC SMB runs the technical activity of the entire IEC, including all the technical committees of which CISPR and TC77 on EMC are members of. So I chair this meeting, and it was held in Boston a couple of weeks ago, actually only 2 weeks ago. And we hold meetings twice a year, face-to-face, and then a webinar in between. And some of the material that I'll talk about today is just look to show you what we did on our webinar in the end of August, so you can get a thread of what's happening. One of the recorded some webinars earlier this year was on the meeting in May of this year, 2015, and this will be obviously a major update of that. So with that in mind, I'm not going to go through all the agenda items, so maybe I'll speak to them as we scroll down here. There's the usual stuff at the front. We have terms of reference, which I don't think it's important for this webinar at the moment. We, of course, approve the agenda. Then we have a lot of current activity. We have 18 members of the ACEC, and 2 of them had term limits, and we had replacements. And Barry Helmy is the replacement for TC46. For those of you that don't know what TC46 does, they are the cabling people in the IEC, and obviously cables shielded, screened, unscreened, and twisted pair, for example, are very important in EMC applications. That's why we have them represented on the advisory committee on EMC. Shinobu Ishigami was a appointment by the SMB itself. What they look for in appointing members, in which no more than 1/3 can be appointed from the SMB, is to sort of round out the either geographically or technology, etc. And clearly we need representation and have it from both China and Japan from the Far East. 4.2 on the agenda then is the terms of office. The term is 3 years, and then you have the ability for 2 3-year extensions. For example, the two there, AJ Garg and Adi Ongonzola, is up for this first 3-year extension. And all of these we have to pass on to the Standardization Management Board for approval. That's why it's an important part. And Mr. Wu there is, of course, our Chinese representative, and Bernd Schultz is from the EU, as well as Bernd Gerke. So I won't go into anything more about that, but you see my name there. Believe it or not, it's my 3rd year completion will be in June of this coming year. So I have already agreed that I will take the extension. Then we have future representatives. TC22 is important because they are the grid-connected power inverters. There was the power supplies at the AC-DC converter people. And they are in a situation where below 150 kilohertz, there's no limits for other than radio protection. And when you start putting harmonics on the mains, and I'll talk about this a little bit later on, there are people that are concerned that use the mains for telecommunications purposes or signaling purposes, such as the power line communication, PLC and PLT. And that is the way in which information is sent back and forth on the mains by the smart meters in the smart grid application. So it's more than just a casual issue. And those meters generally run in the 50 to 80 kilohertz region. And again, I'll talk about that later on. Moving on to 4.4, every one of our members has an assignment of what they will report or at least keep track of. I make sure that everybody in the room has a job. I get very annoyed if people look at their email during our meetings, and therefore each one will be asked in general to give a short report of what they are responsible for. I won't bring that all up because it's still under, we have to have a new version of it. That's why it just says ACEC XXX. Then we review the minutes of the meeting. I've already talked about in our May webinar about the meeting in Wuhan, China, which was in May of this year. At the end of August, we held a webinar, and what I do in between to keep the pace going is to identify, let's see if I can make that a little bit bigger, identify what the action items were coming out of the meeting. And let me just give you a show. If you, well, you won't have it, but let me just show it to you. Like Paltra was requested. These are the extensions, so this is administrative. There's a couple ones that did come up that we'll talk about just briefly a little bit later. I wanted Dr. Radasky to provide a presentation on functional safety for EMC, and he did that. And on Action 15-16 is for Robert Stitzman from, well, he's the medical person from Siemens, and he gave one on risk analysis. So, and when I mean gave them, they were scheduled for this meeting 2 weeks ago, and in fact, each one of them gave a 20-minute presentation, which was quite revealing, because a lot of people don't know the difference between functional safety and EMC application, and they are different. Even though you may use EMC test methods to prove a case for functional safety of the product for the long term, from first use to last use. So again, I don't propose to go over all these action items, because most of them, in fact, I think all of them are on the agenda that we're going. But I just wanted to point out that we keep after this, and I'm scrolling fast, I apologize, but there's really nothing I want to speak to on this. Then if there's some particular hot topic, we would pause, and of course the one that I will say later on the agenda is what happens with the issue I just mentioned about harmonics on the mains power line and the effect on power line communications, which is what's in agenda item 7 here. And there was a action to check, because the UK National Committee, as you can see here, had a question of why things were not progressing too fast, and we ended up discussing that. Every other year, the chair of all the advisory committees are asked to present to the SMB a review of what they've done and what's coming in the future. And my turn is February of 2016, and I put together the slide deck that we will use for that. And of course, I want to make sure that I didn't misspeak, and also get the full support of the ACEC, in which I did. And that deck's about to be ready to be sent off to the SMB's secretary to put it on the agenda. So that's a trip for me to Geneva. And then I think I'll close this down. Actually, it's closed down after an hour and 45 minutes. These I tried to do it in an hour, but I never can do it because we have so much to cover. So they're starting to be 90 minutes. All right. So I reviewed 5.2 right now. There is a spreadsheet which I'll talk about in a minute. Item 6. So let's go on to the heart of the webinar. These are reports, and we always start off with the Standardization Management Board matters, because they are essentially our boss. And if I'm going to pull up just sort of one randomly here. This is the way in which the SMB publishes. You can see on the top, SMB 5618/R for report. And when we go through that, well, I'm not going to go through all of it, but it's fairly brief. And I mentioned that we had all these people that we wanted to get confirmed, and the action was to invite the SMB to approve. And if I brought up the actual result of this report, all of those were approved. And we, of course, when we bring them, we bring in their curriculum vitae, so he knows what we're talking about. One of the issues came up of people were interested in having more than just the classical residential and commercial, or excuse me, residential and industrial environments, and therefore limits and test levels. Well, in the IEC TC77, there is a document 61000-2-5 that has about 20 environments, from power stations all the way up through, all the way down to residential area. So the argument was, should we have limits for all these environments? And of course the answer was no. We've had 2 levels of emission limits for a great period of time, and why should we change that? Because, and also because the regulators decide which emission limits apply in their particular country. So it's out of our control in any case. And theoretically, the regulators could put together their own set of limits, but of course they rely on the voluntary standards activity of the IEC to give them guidance. From the test level perspective, the immunity side, that is obviously There is a minimum essential requirement coming out of the EMC directive, which will soon be placed into the radio equipment directive in middle of 2016. And it says you should have essentially considered it and have inherent immunity, but it doesn't say what test level to do it to. And even the measurement methods that are classically known as, for example, in the IEC 61000-4-X series, give several levels to select from, and one is usually it's up to you. And the classical case is, well, everything is tested, at least for radiated electric field immunity, to 3 volts per meter, but that doesn't mean that that is suitable for the product to live in the RF environment when the customer gets a hold of it. I know in the telephone business we test it to 30 volts per meter without even blinking an eye, and because we didn't want field complaints, because anyone that gets into field complaints, those are very expensive to sort out and then to have a fix after the fact. So we talked a little bit about the compatibility level, which I already mentioned, below 150 kilohertz. I'm going to talk a little bit more about young professionals. Believe it or not, young professionals are generally within the graduation of 5 to 10 years, and there have been those that they fill out a form to the IEC of their interests, and we have found those that are interested in EMC standardization, and I'll cover that in the agenda later on. Human exposure is always on the list. The latest thing that is of concern is the wireless power transfer. For example, charging a vehicle where you're talking about tens of kilowatts, and the human may still be in the car. Even though we're talking at low frequencies, there's still an exposure situation that has to be addressed. So they just started a working group to address what might be the method of measurement. You can imagine, how would you simulate an automobile with a loop on its underside sitting over a loop in the ground as it pulls up to charge? Is that the test bed, or can you replicate it differently in a test chamber, for example? So that gives you a sense of what we tell the SMB, and of course we tell who's present and so forth. I think that's all I want to talk about on that part of it. Without bringing up, let me just speak to, because I'm going to get into 77 CISPR here with some of the time we have. On 7.1, I just reviewed at least what the SMB did for when we asked for the extensions of the people, and then we always add the material I just showed to keep their, well, actually to keep them informed. And by doing that, I know when I go to Geneva in February of 2016, they're going to be primed to challenge me and ask questions, which is fine. There's 15 members, by the way, on the SMB, and they're from all different countries throughout the world. It's not EU-centric. It's quite diverse. They're elected, and obviously they don't know all the subjects that they have to be addressing, so they rely on advisory committees, and that's, again, is where ACEC comes into play, being the advisory part for their EMC questions that they may have. Okay, there's an interesting one on 7.3, and maybe I'll just bring up that administrative circular here. AC stands for administrative circular, which means it goes to the world. The ITU, International Telecommunications Union, the radio sector, is asking for manufacturing, the smart manufacturing mode, to have, as you can see the second paragraph, to define 80 megahertz of the spectrum between 1.4 and 6 gigahertz as owned by industrial automation facilities. And for those that may not be that familiar, the radio spectrum is quite intense and quite filled, and to carve out 80 megahertz in the region for sole use is very, very difficult. But this is the kind of things they come to ACEC, for example, and say, hey, what is your opinion? And we are addressing that, but we haven't. The initial answer is we need to know what radio services are in that 80 megahertz range that they're going to pick out. Because again, from CISPR's perspective, we have to protect the radio spectrum. And from the immunity perspective, there is only certain frequencies that are in the radiated electric field immunity test between 1 and 6 gigahertz. And if the spectrum part that they selected is not in the test 61004-3, for example, then that's not covered from an immunity perspective. So you can see that once you make a statement like this, it starts snowballing into a lot of things have to be considered. And you can see this is only 1 month old, this request. And what happens is, at the end of this document, the IEC National Committee are asked to support this approach with their local government administrators. Well, don't forget, this is ITU now. They are a treaty organization, and what they come out with recommendations is equivalent to a standard that shall be used worldwide. It's quite different than the IEC, which develops nothing but a voluntary standard, So they can make this statement here, and they're asking the national committees, that's a second opinion, more or less, even though the national committees are really not in the business of telling local governments what to do. So there's a lot of complexity here, both administratively and technically. But this will be on our agenda for a couple meetings. But I just wanted to show it that we get these sort of thrown over the transit, if you will, and we have to deal with it because the SMB is going to eventually ask us, well, what's your opinion of what the IEC should do? Even though this is directed at the national committees of the IEC, in general, they're all represented on the SMB itself, so it will come home somehow back to the Standardization Management Board. So I thought that was an interesting thing to show, one of the unique things that came up in Boston 2 weeks ago. Then there's various reports, and I, as chairman of CISPR and of course chairman of ACEC, but as chairman of CISPR and chairman and TC77 chairs are ex officio members, and they're members of ACEC as long as they're still in their position. So I've been chair of CISPR now going on 9 years, which by the way is the term limit. So I will be replaced in October of next year. And the TC77 chair has at least another extension, so he'll be around a while. 9 years is enough, guys. So let's just show you what I put together. It's a short presentation of what happened at the CISPR plenary. And let me just sort of go through it. Here's the who's who. The big difference in this particular committee is we have basic standards. In Subcommittee A, we have basic emission generic limits, and we have product-specific application. And if you look at that list of products there, ISM is Industrial, Scientific, and Medical, by the way. There's few things that we don't cover. That, in fact, I can't even think of any other than maybe certain facets of electric vehicles, for example, which is unique. And look at our membership, it's quite extensive. I always keep telling the folks that we are more than just national committees, and that's why it's called Special Committee, International Special Committee. And you can see the list of the international people, and we have the Amateur Radio Union, European Broadcasters, ECMA, which used to be European Computer Manufacturers Association, but now it's just called ECMA International, and so forth. You can probably relate to the organizations there in your own work. We always have information from the central office. Don't want to spend time on that. We did administrative work this last time and how we make decisions at our plenary, where not necessarily all the people from the national committees are represented. And now we have a method to handle that by getting the information out 6 weeks in advance so they can instruct the head of delegation what to vote on these things. And I don't want to spend any more time. We certainly are heavily involved in the wireless power transfer. And again, in this, when we say wireless power transfer, we're generally talking about the range, well, 9 kilohertz to 150 kilohertz. And for example, conducted emission limits start at 150 kilohertz and above. So we're in the part that, if you look at our lighting document, we do have limits below 150 kilohertz. But the question is, does that suffice beyond lighting? And there's more information about that. And this compatibility level is a hot topic, and it was assigned to Subcommittee 77A, which is low frequency, and one of the working groups they have, and they've been meeting like every 2 to 3 months with webinars in between, because it's a lot of pressure from the Standardization Management Board to come up with a solution. And I'll talk about this a little bit later. Then we talk about our liaison reports and so forth. We have joint task forces. We're very active in the TEM reverberation area. We've done work in the FAR, fully anechoic room, but right now it's idle because no one's asked for any further need for what we've already published. And the joint task forces between 2 subcommittees, one in CISPR and one in 77. So we get both the emission and immunity perspective on the use of TEM and reverb. And then it's the usual dashboard, and I always try to point out where we are on the website. So let me close that and go back to the agenda. Let me close this all the way. Some of the other reports, let's bring up the A report just briefly, because some of this is too detailed to go over in our webinar, but it's worth. And there goes a train. Subcommittee A is basic standards, and it covers, which you can see in the 4 indented bullet items there. And there's a lot of documents published. One of the biggest ones this year was 1616 and 1615. 16 is antenna calibration, and 15 is the test site with which to do the calibration. So that's been a lot of activity. And again, I'm not going to go into detail, but we asked for what's active and what isn't. And you can see from some of the subject matters, we're into the grid connected power supplies in 1612, and we're introducing a artificial network with which to measure that, and so forth. And the new work is preparatory at the moment. As you can see, it's mainly maintenance work. I don't want to spend time on it. Then we have 2 working groups. Working group 1 is the instrumentation side, and they do, for example, the antenna calibration. And in the first one there, 1614, we want to see how to measure radiated below 30 megahertz, and that would obviously be a loop antenna magnetic field measurement, and so forth. So I don't want to go any further than that. In working group 2 is the method of measurement group, and so anything that comes up from the instrumentation perspective is a partner with the actual measurement method. And I'll just look at the first one right there. Is the question was, if you're going to do a measurement, should you use the separation distance based on which portion of a log periodic antenna is active, and since log periodic can be 1 to 2 meters front to back, that would say that you would be moving the antenna mast a lot. And the question is, can we do it mathematically? by saying it's calibrated at midpoint, and we know for very low frequency, let's say 200 megahertz, the back elements are the most active, and we can calculate, knowing the construct of the antenna, where that phase center is, and maybe that should be the correction to the measured results. I think this is going to be terribly complex, and there isn't a whole lot of support for it, but we have to see where it goes. I don't think there's anything on it. So there's a question on size of the equipment. When you get down less than 30 megahertz, you know, the wavelengths become very large, and if you're only 3 meters or 5 meters separation, should there be a limitation of the size? Now, as you know, when you do a radiated electric field immunity test, if it's a big product, you move the antenna from side to side to illuminate in sequence the product, not the entire product. Because if you moved it back to the antenna back 10 meters, you wouldn't, it'd be a tremendous amount of power needed to come up with a fairly high field strength. So I talked about the joint task forces, and I think that's all I want to say about this. By the way, Subcommittee A chairmanship is up for replacement, and it'll be interesting to see how that goes. There's no U.S. person that's been named to be a candidate for replacement. Subcommittee B report, which is document 17 here. Oh, come on, babes. Let's try it again. Yep. This is very detailed. Bernd Sisolewski is stepping down. As the biggest thing is CISPR 11 is their prime publication. It's published, the latest edition, published last June. One of the things they tried to do, rather than identifying specific what's IEC, what is industrial, what is a medical equipment, what is a the scientific equipment, if you will, is to have the limits and the test setups to be technology neutral, as it says here, so that something comes in that has the appearance of an ISM device, but it wasn't considered in the specific test setup, for example. There's examples there now how you would handle new technology as far as they could guess. I mean, obviously, you can't guess what happened 10 years from now. So, and it's all based on type testing, which means the testing of the first product. And the regulators make a decision if there's any ongoing testing that's required. So there's a set of emission limits, and again, we're CISPR, so it's emission side of the house. And you can see we're looking at 1 to 18 gigahertz, whereas in the multimedia standard, CISPR 2232, it only goes up to 6 gigahertz. I think that's all I want to say about that. And my guess, without going through all of them, I may briefly sort through them here, but I ask is anything that the presenter representing their committee wants ACEC to particularly pay attention to. And what Bernd put down at the bottom here, CISPR B was invited to provide the reason, it was invited, so it was done internally, so that there be negotiation of CISPR A. So that's purely information. And if I go, I'm going to pick some others here where it goes into here. This diverging opinion still exists on which way to handle the wireless power transfer between radio user and radio equipment industry authorities dealing with. So these are all comments that he was saying, and so far he wasn't asking anything particular of ACEC, and a lot of things he's asking of. Now here's one in which we spent time on. This is if you have a wireless power transfer, vis-a-vis an iPod sitting on top of a small loop with milliwatts to a electric vehicle with kilowatt transfer, is there a control frequency, or is there a radio service that's over that is part of the occupied bandwidth, because once you get into a radio service, communicating data, for example, rather than just status, you get into the International Telecommunication Union issues of, because that's their baby to handle the radio spectrum. So there are several cases was pointed out, 3 of them here, where you have not only the control frequency, but you also have a radio frequency that applies to other communication functions. So at the bottom he says this position was communicated, which it was, possibly needs further support from ACEC in convincing the authorities. Well, as we are a voluntary standards organization, the IEC, ACEC listened, but there's nothing we can do to start going down the list of national authorities and saying, do this and do that. So that was an interesting comment, but we couldn't take action on it. So I'm going to stop with the ISM at the moment and move on to make sure we get a full sampling of what was done at the meeting. Subcommittee H is on generic emission limits, and Beniamino Guarini is the chair from Italy, Alcatel-Lucent, and there's 2 standards that are very active and that we keep maintained. It's on emission standards for both residential and industrial environments. And there were some comments received on what to do with this, and you can see in the red there, this subcommittee is now considering the inclusion of emission limits for DC ports, because the rest of it was only 150 kilohertz and above, which was an AC test. And then I've already mentioned if they have a model that they could apply to saying what the limits might be below 30 megahertz all the way down to 9 kilohertz, which is the start of CISPR's responsibility. And I'm just browsing here. They include the 3rd bullet item. They're worried about size of equipment, therefore separation business, separation of these. And they're drawing upon what CISPR 11 has, so that's good. We have good coordination there. And there's a lot of stuff going on this chart, and this is the last thing I think I'll show, shows that depending on the standard that you're looking at and which limit, Class A or Class B, you can see for the generics we've had domestic and residential, which by the way, residential is getting to be preferred, not using the word domestic. They believe that was a U.S. term, and I don't remember that relationship, but they say. Then commercial, light industrial, and then heavy industrial. And you can go down there, you can see for, let's just pick one out here. The ISM group, go down to the power tools, CISPR 14, and for TVs, and CISPR 13, which is the emission limit for measurement method and limits for TV broadcast receivers. You can see they just have domestic and residential, domestic and residential. They don't have anything to do with commercial, light industrial, heavy industrial, claiming that the tools are going to be used in the residential environment, the TV. But as we well know, those products are used kind of everywhere, aren't they? So this table was trying to point out that we have different perspectives even in our own intra-CISPR standardization. And we're working on that. Should we keep it that way, or should we try in future revisions to get them a little closer? And I think that's all we have time for here. Yeah, I'm just going to go to the end. So we've already talked about the areas of new work, below 30 megahertz. Probability factors, it's not just that you meet the limit, but what's the probability of radio interference if you did meet the limit, or if you're 10 dB below it or 10 dB above it. And the other one, the 3rd bullet item there is photovoltaics, and the extra low voltage in-house lighting is currently under study. I don't know how many you get into photovoltaics, but that's going to be very popular. And I think there's people that belong there. And again, a note for again. Let's move on. Let's go on to 77 side of the story. This is from the chairman of 77, Hiroyuki Osaki. He's a university professor, and well, obviously the scope statement. But I think this is just to point out how 77 is split up. 77A is low frequency, less than 9 kilohertz. That's for the harmonics, and but for the work that we're worried about on the compatibility levels with power line communications, they are also involved up to 150 kilohertz. And for the radio protection, CISPR would be involved. 77B is, they consult high frequency, and that's where the 61004-X series and 3-2 and 3-12 come from. And then the last one is 77C, high power transients. And you can see this is the nasty stuff, high altitude pulse. But the other one, the second one there, electromagnetic interference, intentional. This is the terrorists now, they're having the ability to build an amplifier and an antenna, a small antenna, and put it in a briefcase and walk up to an ATM machine and wipe it out electronically. And there's concern with that. In fact, the IEEE Spectrum had an article on this earlier this year of the potential concern with this. And it's happening. You can build these things out of spare parts. And then there's a lot of what I would consider just a listing of standards that are doing it. Working Group 13 is the one that I spoke to that does the environments, the 61002-5, and in fact I've been invited to go there to give a perspective on the CISPR side of the house at this meeting in Santa Barbara, which is 2 weeks from now, or a week from now, roughly. It's in California, and there's the 2-5 I spoke of. Description and classification of electromagnetic environments. And they have endless tables of sources of RF. This is all transmitted RF, and separation distances that are typical. And if you were a test laboratory and wanted to discuss what test levels to test to, I would suggest you look at this document. If the customer says I'm going to be in a particular environment, and if it's listed there, there are some field strengths that should be used in the radiated immunity test. And again, I'm not going to go through all the tests, but the idea is that he's trying to bring us up to date on various parts, and we put this as what we call a collaboration tool. We add it to our essentially annexes to our report, so that people can look at it, and 77 people and the IEC people can look at it. That's the only problem that you have, is that all these are password protected, and when people ask me questions, I probably try to pull a couple things out that I think is important without giving the whole document away. This is, let me just make a couple notes on the frequency range 2 to 150 kilohertz on this compatibility level activity to, again, have some control over the emissions from a grid connected power inverter or AC-DC converter, vis-a-vis the issue of power line communications that smart meter people are using. And the meters are under TC13 authority, and the GPC folks, PC is under TC22. And I'm just going to bring up one of these, see if it comes up. Yeah. This is a committee draft, and that means it's the first start of activity. And you can see the introductory note here, and I'm not going to go through the document. But what this particular one says is there is a proposed revision to what to do between 2 and 30 kilohertz, and to keep 30 to 150 kilohertz under consideration. And then, so if you look at this document, it relates to the 30 to 150 kilohertz part, and since it's the 2 to 30 is well underway, this is a proposal to modify 61000-2-2, and with the compatibility levels they have up to 30 kilohertz. So and there's of course a lot of information there. If I close that and bring up this one, it'll come up. This is it's called the DC. That's a document for comment to the national. They're asking the National Committee for comments, and this in particular, if I go down to, is the unresolved part of the 30 to 150 kilohertz region. So there are, let's see if I can get it real quick here. There are two options. Option A is supported by the working group that prepared the document, and this is related to industry, as you can read yourself, producing general equipment. In other words, the people that put stuff through the power supply onto the mains. Option B is supported by the electrical distribution people, which is providing the mains communication system, which I already mentioned is power line communications for smart grid. And you can imagine they are not the same. So they're asking the national committees which of the two options, and I'm just going to show you this curve. And if you look at the 30 to 150 kilohertz region, I don't know if you can see the color. The difference between green and blue is well over 10 dB, and that is where the smart meters are working in this band, roughly around 80 kilohertz. So if the national committees want option A or option B, there's a direct impact on what can be placed on the mains and what kind of immunity would be required for the power line communications, which you got to realize has to have a strong signal to noise ratio, or they won't communicate very well, because the power line isn't a great method of transporting communication information at these frequencies. So it'd be very interesting to see, and I think the due date is somewhere, probably at the bottom. Well, let's go back to the front. Usually it could be at the bottom of the front. Yes, right here, January 15th. So 6 weeks from now. People are very interested in looking at this. Okay, let's move on then to just a couple of samples. I'll do the B report just because most people are interested in the 61,000 series, and this is by Luis Nino from Spain, and there's two working groups and maintenance team. MT is maintenance team. One is working group 10, which does the rating conducted, and maintenance 12 is the transient test. So you can tell the difference between 61,000, 4-3 and 4-4 and 4-5, for example. 4-6, they're not doing anything at the point because it's just been published in 2015. 4-3 is still is 2015, so they're already working on a CD to make some amendments. And what I understand is the putting in more specifics of measurements above a gigahertz. 4-6, the conducted, it's recently published, no activity. These are other broadband, and 4-39 is of interest. This is measuring within, let's say, a meter away from the product, a field applied to the product, and they call it radiated fields in close proximity. It's not 3 meters away, it's not 10 meters away, it could be very, very close. It'd be interesting to see how that works out. You can see there is a second CD, CD2, which means they've run into issues with the first CD proposal. And there's meetings coming up, and 4 or 5, there's a concern on the surge. One of the concerns is that the test setup was changed. So if you got the latest edition of 4-5, it's different enough that from what the previous edition was, and the people on the multimedia side are very concerned, and therefore are only accepting the previous edition at the moment. And I guess I won't go into all the rest here. And there's the TEM selectivity. Okay. So you're kind of up to date on what's happening in those major ones. Let me just kind of pick and choose here because we're running out of time. 46, I've already talked about. These are the ones that do the cabling. 13 and 22, I've essentially addressed. 13 being the meter people, and 22 being the grid-connected power converter people. 69 is electric vehicle. It's a very short presentation, but let me bring it up. Jacques Lidebel is the person, and the activity here is charging system being on the vehicle or off the vehicle. And there are 2 different ways of doing that test and what should be both the emission test and the immunity test. So their activity right now that he reported on was what you do with onboard and offboard charging systems. And you can see in this particular case on the offboard, it's on the 4th CD. That means there have been already 4 iterations of, there was 3 before that people didn't agree on, and they wanted still more technical changes made. It's extraordinary to go to 4th CD. I can occasionally get the 2nd CD to clean up some things before we go to a document for vote. So that's symptomatic of what they're running into. And the rest of it is just other details which we don't have to go into. TC 106 is the human exposure. I'm responsible for that. I'm the liaison rep, and what I tried to do is give them a little hint. Cannot open specify file. Well, that makes it easy. I won't open it. The thing I wanted to point out is there is a guide being prepared on human exposure measurements. 106 is measurements, not limits. Limits are done by others. In our case, the FCC, for example, and most of the other world, ICNIRP, International Committee on Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection. We had inputs from the ITUT, Study Group 5, and I just show you the titles. It's amazing how the ITUT, which is the telecom sector, are heavily involved in EMC. Why aren't you opening up? Very strange. It froze on me. Why did it do that? Let me go back to the, bring it back up again. Welcome back. Thank you. So let's go where I left off. Down at the bottom here. Okay. One thing I would point out is that I also give a presentation on the standards work that's going on in the EMC Society. And I have no idea why it's not opening up, so I'll just speak to it. We only have a few minutes left anyhow. One thing I try to do is, for example, we have a standard on shielding effectiveness. We have a standard on near-field measurements. We have a standard on computational electromagnetics, and none of that exists in the IEC. So one of the things I tried to bring up is maybe it could be a joint project with the IEC through what they call a dual logo agreement. So that was the gist of that talk. The ETSI talk is just mainly bringing up what's happening in the major ETSI standards, and I don't think it's of interest for us right now because, again, I'm having trouble bringing things up. The young professionals, I can speak to this without showing a slide. We have now identified 14 or 15 young professionals that indicated when they were named young professionals, which are named by the national committees, and the IEC invites them to the general meeting, and they are given special training, but they have to fill out a form of their interests, and there was that number that are interested in EMC. So the vice chair of ACEC put together a plan on how we communicate with them, how we ask if, well, we try to get a mentor that can show them a local meeting of, let's say, an EMC chapter of the IEC or an EMC chapter of IEEE. It doesn't make any difference here, but mainly the IEC. And if they're really interested how to join their respective national committee for, let's say, TC 77 or CISPR. And that plan is being worked, and right now the good news is we have a mentor assigned to all those young professionals. And the thing came up at the last time I gave this talk in 2014. I was asked bluntly by one of the SMB members, who's going to replace you and others that are, obviously up in years. And the question, one of the responses was, well, how about trying the young professionals, the next generation, so to speak. And so that kind of moved it along. And I'm keeping after it. I would like to see 20 or 30 identified to start being replacements for people that have been on our committees for a long period of time and will retire, and that's the last we see of them. Item 13, I already mentioned the two presentations that were made. The functional safety one is a very good one. It's all text, so even if I brought it up, it would just take forever. We have a home page, as I showed you, item 14 here. One of the things, if you click on all those buttons in the left-hand column there, it will bring up a page, and at the top of the page there's 4 or 5 other sub buttons, if I can use that word. And what I did is I took all that information and ended up putting together 62 slides with that information in each of the slides, for each tab. And then I assigned it at this meeting to all the members well, not all, but most of the members, to take, slides 17 through 19 and update it, or tell us if it's okay. So every one of the ACEC members that was assigned, and I think it was almost like 9 people, the thing I would bring to the webinar here is that once that's done, I'm going to try to make that public, so that if you want to give a slide presentation on EMC, although it's obviously from an IEC webpage, but what is EMC is applicable to any organization that is into EMC, and you could use those slides at a chapter meeting or something, a symposium, etc. Not all 62 of them, but maybe on a particular tab you would show that tab. So I'm looking forward to having some really good information coming out of that. Item 15 was just a letter that was brought. There was a difference in the horizontal cable exposure with the basic standard and the product standard, and one had 80 centimeter horizontal cabling to get the horizontal polarization from an EUT, and the other one just dropped it to the floor, and the question was raised, why is there a difference? And we had a nice discussion about that. Number 16 there is the SMB presentation that I'm going to be giving on 23rd of February in Geneva, and it was approved. And with that, I think we've covered the main things that I wanted to present for this webinar. As you can see, we had almost, if I counted the number of documents, we had almost 40 documents, and it's a full 2 days. But we have some intense work that we try to do to, again, if there's a problem provided to us from a technical committee on EMC matters, we try to give guidance. And then if the SMB itself says, go sort through like this compatibility level, we go in the other direction. So it's a very good method, and I like it because I work with 15, 20 technical committees that have EMC somewhere in their application. So it's very broadening for myself. So with that, I am going to close the webinar. You can see 18, we have ACEC meetings coming up, so probably we'll have another one after the May meeting, which will be in London at the BSI headquarters. I just will keep doing this because I think it's of use, especially since you can view it via the recording. So with that, I'm closing the webinar and thank all the participants and those that are just seeing the webinar for the first time on the recorded aspect. And again, this is a member benefit for ACIL members. For those that are not ACIL members, there's a modest fee charged. But again, this is meant to support the conformity assessment section and of course the EMC portion thereof. So with that, I close the webinar and wish you good holidays for the next month.